Hi, my name is John Odum. I live in Montpelier, where I have been the city clerk for the last 10 years. Prior to that, my career mostly consisted of popping around various political campaigns or nonprofits. I've worked for nonprofits such as Planned Parenthood and the Vermont Natural Resources Council, both doing political organizing and IT work. I have a number of IT certifications. The one I like to talk about because it gets the most attention is Certified Ethical Hacker. I'm also a certified network defense architect, and these are skills that I think are very relevant to the Office of Secretary of State. Right now we're talking more than just about anything compared to all the functions of that office is election security, and a lot of that is election cybersecurity. And talking about election security broadly has been the number one thing in the campaign that I'm trying to get across to people, that I'm trying to communicate. A little on that, cybersecurity-wise, I think you'll find that Vermont has done very well. I think Jim Condos and Chris Winters, my opponent, have done a good job under the current paradigm. But I think situations are changing, especially with the war in Ukraine. We've been advised by the Department of Homeland Security to expect more attacks and to expect attacks on critical infrastructure. And critical infrastructure is what elections are. So what I've been proposing on the campaign trail is to get away from some of these opaque corporations that we contract with to run our elections for us, to hold our election database that holds all the registered voters on it. Right now we use one of a very few companies that are available to do that has a sketchy record on security. I would like to abandon that paradigm completely. I'd like to see us turn around to an open source model. Open source is non-corporate, it's collaborative, and improvements are being made on it. Improvements are being made on the security of it 24/7 by a greater community of international experts. And the reason that's important is because the hackers from foreign interests are also working on getting in 24/7. What we've had up to now is a fundamentally reactive model for computer security, for voter security, and I'm talking about changing it to a proactive one. Now, there are a few other things we can do in terms of securing our elections. Right now, clerks like me, we're doing our election management through this system, but we're using the same computers that we're using to check our email, go on Facebook, and this is trouble. Okay, 95% of hacks come from viruses or out-of-date software. So what we need to do is get all of us clerks a couple dedicated workstations only for elections. That's the only thing they're used for. That's the only thing they can be used for. Run them through a coordinated network so we can keep their software up to date, so we can have antivirus software working on them, and create a whole new type of firewall between those local users. You know, some of these folks, some of these clerks like me are not very sophisticated, from those local users up to the top. And there's so much more we need to do in that capacity too. Again, not to disrespect what's been done. We've done a great job, but taking it to the next level means we need a certification process for our voting machines, a Vermont certification process. Clerks need to be trained to create continuity of operations plans, working with their local public security, and having those plans drilled through at the local level and certified by the Secretary of State. We also need to fight more against the disinformation, which is a huge issue with having secure elections that we can be confident in the results about. The amount of disinformation pumped out there, again, by foreign actors is enormous. I probably don't have to tell you about this. But there is a facility through the Department of Homeland Security, through some corporate interests, through statewide secretaries of state, where that information is collected and transmitted back out. Now, you don't see Vermont clerks really involved in that because it's really geared towards big jurisdictions in the rest of the country, but the Secretary of State can play that role. Secretary of State's office should capture the information that's coming down about nationwide disinformation, and then capture the information that we as clerks can generate from the other end, from the bottom. Bring that up, they meet, we all get informed about each other. Be a great role for the Secretary of State to play. Now, there's a lot of other things the Secretary of State's office does. On top of that list is the Office of Professional Regulation. Okay, this is the outfit that licensed professionals, tens of thousands of licensed professionals around the entire state. Now, since I said I would be running for Secretary of State, I've been approached by a couple of licensed professionals. Actually, the first one was my tattoo artist here, saying that she'd like to see that network really be used more for professional development. So I think we could do that, but think about what kind of professional development we can do. If we can do straight up traditional professional development, we could also do anti-racist training. We could do pro-LGBTQ plus training. We could put in professional development to help these licensees and local businesses work towards greener working environments, work towards net zero. And let me just give you an example, because people always ask me for an example, and this is the simplest one that I could give, but it's the tip of the iceberg. Imagine if we pumped out onto this network that the Secretary of State has, tens of thousands of professionals, the Equal Pay Compact. Okay? That is a compact whereby businesses, cities like my own Montpelier, sign on to promise to always give equal pay to women as men. If we pumped that out onto that network, we would have the signatories triple, quadruple, quintuple in no time, and spread that kind of understanding of the issues and spread that kind of buy-in on these values. That's what we're talking about, is Vermont values and the kind of ways we can really change and continue to develop a culture of values across the state. This is an out-of-the-box way to use that network, that professional regulation network that is maintained at the Secretary of State's office. Now, I could go on. There's so many things the Secretary of State does. Archives. Now, I'm a city clerk, okay? I think the great thing about being a city clerk, running for this office, is that city clerks, town clerks, like no one else know our communities, but we also know the work. We work on elections. We work on archives. We work on licensing. But we do it at the neighbor-to-neighbor level. We're looking our neighbors in the eyes, we're shaking their hands, we're hearing their concerns. It's a real grassroots model. Archives is a great example. The Secretary of State manages the state archives. We manage our local city archives. We do work together to an extent, but there's a lot more that our two operations could learn from each other. I know we certainly have a lot to learn from the state archives, but I think every aspect of the Secretary of State's office would do well to be informed by the experience of local clerks, by the experience of a grassroots level connection to your community, actually doing the work that the Secretary of State oversees with our own hands. Now, there's a great operation right now, and again, I want to mention that Chris Winters, Jim Condos have done a really good job putting together a good structure, a good operation. But imagine taking that grassroots, neighbor-to-neighbor perspective and putting it on top of that pyramid and having a neighbor-to-neighbor perspective really inform that entire structure and that operation. I think there is only good to come of that, and I am extremely excited to get involved as Secretary of State and make those changes happen for the better. Now, of course, the Secretary of State is ultimately the guardian of democracy in our state. This is no longer a paper-pushing job. I don't think anybody anymore would argue that it is, but it's a values job. And because it's a values job, it also has to be a job of imagination. We need to move beyond the box. And there's a couple ways I think we can do that, we should do that, and we've started doing in this state, that would go statewide. For example, in my own community, I spearheaded an effort to let non-citizens vote in local elections, something you may have heard about. Winooski then picked up the effort as well when they heard, and they reached out to me and I spoke with them. And we were both successful in getting our charters changed. What this has meant is that those neighbors of ours who are not citizens, but they have kids in the schools, they own property, they pay property tax, they now can get a say in city budgets, in who represents them on the city council, you know, basic stuff that makes you part of a citizen of your community, even if you're not a citizen of the state or the country. And I want to stress, this is just local. You can't, if a non-citizen can't vote in a state election, can't vote in a federal election, that stuff's unconstitutional. But it's a way to get folks more involved in their community. It's the right thing to do. And what it does is it helps create a culture of democracy where more folks are involved. Same thing when Brattleboro was looking into bringing 16 and 17-year-olds into the local voting. The more you create that culture of democracy and that pride around your local democracy, I have to believe that trickles up, and that affects the entire state. Another thing we need to talk about is ranked choice voting. This is something that gets a lot of talk, especially around Burlington, but we don't get that conversation leaving Burlington very often. Now, ranked choice voting in a pinch is where instead of just voting for this person and this person on the ballot, you rank your choices. Here's my first choice, here's my second choice, here's my last choice. And then the system is counted up. You know, the basic system you hear talked about is instant runoff voting. And in that system, you look at all the number one votes, and if nobody's got more than 50%, the one that got the least is dropped off, and you look at their supporters' number two votes. And those get added. You look at the new top line, and eventually you get someone who gets more than 50% of the vote, right? So you've got a system that's more reflective of what people really want, and people can be comfortable voting for who they want without having to worry about voting for someone else because they don't want this guy to win. So you vote strategically. And that just doesn't give you a good picture of what people want. So ranked choice voting, hopefully you've already heard of it because that explanation was a little flying at you really fast. But it's a conversation I want to take statewide. As an election administrator, it has given me the creeps, right? I've stayed up at night trying to imagine what a hand count, recount with instant runoff voting or with ranked choice voting would look like. It would be challenging, but it's the right thing to do, so challenges like that, even to somebody like me, we can take on and we can get through it and we can make it right. What I would like to do is take this conversation on the road. I would like to tour on this, go to local communities, get folks from Maine, where they've been doing ranked choice voting for a while, get together advocates, get together regular voters, get together the clerks who are running the election, and really hash this out. Let's see if we can build consensus around this idea. Because this idea isn't going to work unless folks around the state are talking about it, unless folks around the state have confidence that this is a legitimate way to vote and is a better way to vote than we're doing now. And then that local support can empower your local legislators to then do what's right in the legislature and make it happen. So this might be a long process, but I'm committed to doing it, and I'm committed to keeping that conversation going at the Secretary of State's level. The Secretary of State needs to be involved in these kind of conversations. Going back to the non-citizen voting, we were kind of on our own with that. I actually got sued personally by the Republican National Committee over it. Something I wear as a badge of honor. It was a hoot. It makes for a great story. But I would like to see the Secretary of State in that instance provide support in terms of resources for local communities if they decide to go that route. One story I'll tell you about that real quick. When we enacted non-citizen voting, there was a little side effect from the law as passed that nobody anticipated that created a real technical problem. Now, I happen to be a programmer, not an especially good one, but I'm a programmer. So I was able to build a little computer widget that handled that problem. Now the folks from Winooski, the Winooski clerk contacted me and said, hey, we're going to have this problem. How are we going to handle that problem? I said, I've got a widget. So I took that up there, I put it into their system, I trained their clerk in how to use it, and we were good. And I won't bore you with the details of what the problem was. Suffice to say, it was going to make for a real challenge. But anyways, we shouldn't have had to have the luck of having a programmer as one of our clerks when this was implemented. That's just the kind of support that as Secretary of State, I would be excited about providing to local communities. Thanks for taking the time to listen to what I have to say. The election, the primary election, is August 9th, and whoever you're going to vote for, just make sure you get out and vote. Thanks.